Colvyn, thanks so much for joining me. You've had a spectacular career at JWT, which was your first job. 35 years, you've been at the top of it, and now you're looking at the global piece and looking at new markets and new developments there. Tell me, if you were to, identify three, four, milestones in your journey or turning points, what would they be?
I think I wish I had the wisdom which I now have, because when I started out, it was actually fairly uncharted. Like many young people today, when they start out, they don't know what they really want. But I think what drives you to succeed, or if you're motivated to want to do well or better your lot, so to speak, in a family, then this is the best way. So I think the critical factors in what drove me was really, you must have a passion for what you do. Without that passion, it doesn't make sense, because you're not going to like to get up every morning and go and do the same job over and over again. So I think passion is extremely important. If you can't find the passion and the love for what you're doing, don't do it. It's better to make a mid-course correction and do something fresh. But I think passion is primary, or the top of my list, or what I would think I had, or what I think people should have. Two is, I think you must have a lot of knowledge. Without the knowledge and not being curious about trying to understand what it is that drives a particular industry or a business or the profession you've chosen at that point of time, you won't get very far. So you've got to keep abreast. You've got to read a lot. You've got to listen a lot. You've got to try and get experience from all the people who've already done that, been there, and from them, their learnings. And I think a third is, you must have the right attitude. Because if you don't have the right attitude, I don't think any job is worth doing. So it's a combination of knowledge, passion, attitude. And of course, I'm saying that all things being equal, you already have the aptitude to, or the intelligence, and therefore I presume all of us have the same wherewithal. It's how we finally use that.
You've been with JWT through a very, very interesting period in India's economy, where most of the brands that we know today, Colvyn, evolved in that period. What were the learnings, and what are the 2-3 things or campaigns or clients that you really learned from? Because you've had a chance to meet pretty much all the greatest entrepreneurs in the country.
So I must say, after 35 years in advertising, we were at a time where India was full of shortages. So the drama of India's first Maruti, which now became Suzuki and went on to become a big success, or the first Nikitasha television. So I go back in time and I think of how those categories were formed. So the story of advertising and India, and the story of what we did at that point of time, was to create these various categories, which today have gone on to be what they are. So whether it's two-wheelers or four-wheelers or banking or retail banking, and as these categories exploded, I think that's the story of how India was built, and we've seen a lot of it. So my good fortune was to have worked with a lot of people who were instrumental in creating these companies, the companies which today we know as being famous. For example, Hero Cycles or Hero Motorcycles. At that point of time, these were big things which were happening. We couldn't believe that after having just an Enfield and a ESD, or prior to that a Java, suddenly you had a Honda, you had a Kawasaki, you had a Yamaha, you had a Suzuki motorcycle, and that's the category of or the space advertising was leading. So when you think of what we did in those days, was the formation of categories which went on today to become the large categories all of us are so familiar with. I think what I learned from was all the people who created these categories, people who either started companies or worked for companies. So there are 2-3 different ways of looking at that. There are people who were entrepreneurs. For example, Ritu Nanda and Nikitasha. And of course, she was married to the Nandas from Escorts fame. But she created the Nikitasha range of kitchenettes and televisions and 3Ds and innovation at that point of time. So you learn a couple of things. One is you learn about innovation. You learn about the sheer drive of what it takes to succeed in a business which is in a formative stage. None of them ever had money. And you partner that, because I know we sometimes never got paid, but we knew that the journey they were embarking on was long, and you had to just partner them, and that's the way we were. So in the milestones of all these clients or categories which we worked with, for example, there was Hero, and whether it was a Hero Cycles or Hero and then Hero Motorcycles, then Hero Honda, all of them went through a certain journey cycle, and it was Somebody had the vision, so you learned from them vision. You learned scale. Somebody wanted to scale up to address a country like India. And India is not, a few states. India is the wide India that we know with, today a billion people or billion plus people. So these are the people who had scale, they had vision, they had the tenacity to keep at it. Money was always in short supply. And don't get fooled by the startups which we see today. At that point of time, there was no money. And everybody, it was hand to mouth. It was hand to mouth for agencies. So you learned about resilience. You learned about, the character of some clients and the character of the other clients. People who refused to pay or didn't have the money to pay. We've been through bankruptcies. So I've seen a lot. And in all this, I think somewhere you imbibe from, these people who are admired, who are, in a sense, the people who've been crystallized or catalyzed the growth of India. Sure. So you learn from them what it is to be, a leader. You learn from them what it is to be always trying to build a company from a perspective. Of course, there is always personal wealth as a driving force of any company which is being built, but it's also trying to go into a category which has not been done before and trying to see what you can do with your own acumen.
Who were your role models through the time? Because as you grew, I'm presuming your role models were different. And when you are taking a global role in JWT, you're also interacting with the top-notch, top brass of the advertising industry. So who have been your role models?
So firstly, to just say an advertising agency really is to narrow it to, too narrow. I think just to start a little broadly again, the story of advertising is of working in categories. In those categories, in every category, you're dealing with a different facet or a different multiplier which you work with subsequently. So when I think about my role models, I definitely think a technology role model has always been there. So if you look at Bill Gates or if you look at Steve Jobs, always role models. Role models because they had technology and they put in design and they put in simplicity. So these are elements which are role models for me. If you look at the Indian environment or the India business ecosystem, I definitely think, Shri Brij Mohan Lal from Hero was definitely a role model. He always had, I would just say, he was a giant, a leader, and he had qualities which you could easily want to be like. So you always see yourself in that person. You may never have his wealth, or you may not have what he's achieved, but you definitely imbibe those character, those core, areas which has made him what he is, and therefore you hope that some of that rubs off. So I think of, companies like GSK, Smith Beecham. There was a gentleman called Simon Scuff. He was a British guy who was there for maybe 30, 40 years. He's still the current chairman, I think. And from them you learned, how to be gentle. You learned how to be assertive without being aggressive. So these are qualities in life which you learn. It's easy to be aggressive, but that doesn't get you far. You learn about teamwork. You learn about being gracious. And these are qualities which they don't teach you. So you've got to learn from people who walk that path ahead of you. And I think those are role models I would even today think, cast in stone. Would I wish to be like them? I would.
We often learn from mistakes, and I'm sure you got a couple of campaigns wrong, or got some clients were not happy with you. What is the one mistake that you learned from, which you think was an important one, because of the time and space it happened in?
So I think in anything, the best of strategy is not great or good enough if you don't have the right execution. And I recall, this is something which I've learned, which I now call it the golden mile, is to see that job right down to its last element. And this was when the day Indira Gandhi was shot, and Mrs. Nanda, Ritu Nanda of Nikitasha fame, then wanted to run an ad in condolence, acknowledging, who she was and what had happened. And we had gone to the publication then was Hindustan Times. So I was given the role of, we had created the ad, which, went on to speak of what all Indira Gandhi had achieved, but it also had to have an image of Rajiv, who was going to take over. And I went to the publication. We looked at the images which were available, and there were two very distinct ones of Raji. One was with him laughing, and two was he had a more somber kind of morose kind of face. So I said, whatever happens, don't run the one with the smile. You've got to run the one with this, because you're going to put him up in an ad or a campaign which should have him in the right expression. And I hate to say this, but the next morning the publication had goofed it, and they had put the one with him smiling, and not a good image that morning. So before the office even started, I had called up Mrs. Nanda and apologized. And she said, come and see me, don't worry, it's already done. So what were my learnings? My big learning was your golden mile is where it happens, because between failure and success is what happens then. Now that was one. And two is, from a client I learned the very fine quality of being able to let go and accepting that what had happened just then was not an error of judgment, but an error or a fault which happened because of somebody wasn't thinking when that happened. So I think the golden mile, making sure that the last bit is managed correctly till the last point, if you're responsible and accountable. If you're not, it doesn't matter, because then somebody else would be. So these are some of the big ones.
What could you have done? I mean, what did you do after that? I'm curious. I mean, it was all damage was done.
Yeah, so I had to go and apologize, and she was gracious, and she said that's fine. But that was the greatness of some of the clients I've worked with. And it was a very honest mistake. It was probably made at the point before it went into print, but it happened. And it was there cast in stone forever, because that's how the ad appeared. So that was one. And I mean, there have been many, because the advertising business, every day you have an opportunity to do great work or to mess it up completely. And that's true. So every new idea, every new campaign can become a roaring success, or it can be a failure. And on that rests your profession, because the market is not kind, or let's say the industry is not kind. So if you do something which is incorrect, you're going to have to face the consequences. That was then. Thankfully, there was no Twitter, and there was no Facebook, and there was no social media. But in today's context, I would be toast, because her company would have been toast. And that would have been terrible for everybody. So finally, I probably would have had to pay a greater price than just getting away with saying, I'm sorry.
On the flip side, what's the proudest moment been? Because, you also sat at the helm of JWT when a lot of the great changes were happening in Indian advertising, right? We went and on the international stage, we really rocked it. Our campaigns were talked about. Many of your campaigns won big awards internationally. What would you say was your proudest moment? Getting the award, or the journey to it?
I think a proudest moment is in time. Across a career of many years, there are moments where you're really on top of the world. So there are many proud moments. But I think I was in a company where I always knew that I could be the head of the company. And I think, and I really want to liken this to a marathon runner. It was about having set your sights on wanting to lead this company. There was no owner in HTA then. And that's the big difference, because I knew that if there's no owner, I could be the head of this company. And the various things you did to try and achieve that career goal or career objective. I think the proudest moment was when, the first one, of course, was when I was given an office, those days Chennai. And I think it was Jerry Rao who said that, somebody must move to Chennai. And I went there, I lived for 5 years. So that taught me that, if a company thinks it's right for you, and somebody is thinking through your career, it's a good step to take, which I did. Why would I want to do it today? I wouldn't. Because, and if you have to send something to New York, everybody says yes. But would you take a bad job or a bad location before you take a good one? Is, I think, something I learned. I went to Colombo in the middle of the war. Again, that was as the managing director for company JWT there. Would I have taken it? I did. I had the courage to take it, because I knew it was again another career step. Finally, I came back to India, and I took over a contract from Ram Sehgal. These were famous, very famous legends who we grew up, admiring. So when I took over from him, I think that was a great learning experience. I learned on a smaller operation how to manage it, the value of people, talent, teamwork, and all the things which you know take you to success or failure. But the proudest, absolute proudest moment was when I was offered I think the HTA job then from Mike Khanna. Mike Khanna had just taken over from Ghoshal. So if you look at the lineup of very famous people who had led this company, I would have been the sixth CEO of the company. So there was Mr. Ghoshal, there was Mike Khanna, and then I took over. So I think that was a happy day. I mean, I secretly must have smiled a lot that morning. And we had a champagne toast in the office, though we don't encourage that. And that's how it began. So I think those are proud moments. But I also attribute some of it to myself. Uh, you know, in any job, for you to be successful, you've got to give it your all. There's no shortcut to success, like there's no shortcut to wealth. So you've got to give it your best all the time. You're on, you cannot say I'm half on or half off. There's no such thing as a personal life. There's one life, and you've got to manage both ends of it. So you've got to keep going. You've got to be, absolutely clear as to how you want to do it. Your people are very important, so you've got to carry large teams. The growth of global companies is extremely important, so you've got to ensure you meet that objective as well. And in all that, if you end up having fun, which we encourage people to do, then it's a job you want to do. So after a point, it's no longer a job; it's the only life you're living. And if you're enjoying it, so much the better for you.
You spent 35 years in JWT. I want to ask you, from what I hear, you were very clear that you wanted to have shot at the top job in the company. You had the patience to hang in there for 35 years across ups and downs, and you took challenges. Looking back, what do you think worked in your journey to get to the top? Was it patience? Was it hard work? And what would your advice be to youngsters who want to head agencies one day?
So you've got to see it firstly like a marathon. There'll be every 10 years something is going to change, and you've got to be ahead of your game. I think for me it was firstly hard work. I worked, so to speak, like a dog. I had to, and it was not about outsourcing my thinking. It was always trying to do it yourself. Two is you've got to persevere on what you're doing. You can't give up. You've got to keep at it. It will happen. And at three is, I think most importantly is you never give up. You've got to keep going for what you wanted to do in the first place. Now, in a career is long, 30 years, 35 years. You've got to want something. If you don't want it anyway, you're not going to get it. And nobody is going to think of, where you want to go. You've got to make sure you articulate it to everybody. And at many instances, I've asked, who wants to be a CEO? And you'll be surprised, in a group of 40 or 50 at senior leadership meetings, 3 hands go up or 5 hands go up. Very disappointing. So the first thing is, if you write down the 3 things you want to achieve in the next 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years, if you don't have CEO there, then you're going to be a specialist or a practitioner of something else. It's best you seek that. Now, in my case, I wanted to be CEO. In some cases, people may not wish to be a CEO, because with that comes a lot of responsibility, accountability. You're always at the end of somebody asking you, where's the growth, where's the money, what are you doing? So people don't like that. People today, in today's context, things have changed. So I just want to just talk about today's context. Today, life is very different, because you can create a category or a company and lose it as fast as you created it. So the time it took us in terms of 30 years and 20 years, that's changed. Today, age is off that. If you're great at what you do and you have a skill which nobody else has, and you're faster, better, cheaper, you're going to do much better, faster. So if you look at, and don't get fooled, all this startup is all a dream. Those figures you see is for very few. You've got to think of yourself as being, you're not going to be the only one who's going to become the next Bansal in the world. Not possible. So you've got to think of, I'm not going to be the next Bansal, what am I going to be? And therefore, are you going to work in a company? What category interests you, whether it's banking or insurance or financial services or private equity? Everybody wants to get rich. It doesn't happen like that. what you need to do is try and understand what you really want to do with the life and a career. One of the things we say is that a rolling stone gathers no gratuity. But today's generation don't care about gratuity. They think they're going to get it somewhere else. And I can tell you, for every person who's over the moon for having been successful, there are a million others who are absolutely demotivated, dejected because it didn't happen for them.
And I'm going to ask you about that, because in today's day and age, I think youngsters don't have the patience to be in a job for more than 3-4 years, and they say that, oh, it's getting boring, it's getting mundane, I need to move on. What's your advice to people like that? Because can growth happen if you move from one place to the other, or do you really need to be, crystal clear about where you want to go? As you said, in every 5 years or 10 years, you need to have clear goals set.
So this came up at this under 40 most successful achiever awards recently, which ET had, where everybody in the audience was under 40 because of the nature of the award. And one of the youngsters, I'm using the word youngsters, must have been 30, probably made his millions in one of the new startup companies. He's talked of the uncle companies. The phrase uncle company comes from, if you're 35 in a startup company or in a technology ecosystem, so 35 you're an uncle. And obviously the people who give you that nomenclature are people who are 25 to 30 or 35. And Mr. Shiv Kumar from Pepsi had this to say. He said, by the time you're 40, if that's what you want to achieve, what are you going to do after 40? So I think the important thing is to think of a career as a long-term career. But go with your milestones or your goalposts, which you think are important for you. I don't think there's a solution to, wanting your success. What are you going to become? CEO at 30 and then what? Chopping and changing jobs is great if you know why you're chopping and changing it. But don't change it or leave a job just for that, very little money. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. I think you should move for an element which adds either value to you or adds a new skill to you or a dimension or makes you a better practitioner in whatever field you are. I think that's the only way it will work. Just to change, and I'll just come back to the advertising agency business. Ours is a business where people are expected to leave. People say that if you've not changed your job 5-6 times, it doesn't really help because you can get a little more money every time you move. But if you look at the people who lead our industry space, they've all been there 30 years, 35 years. Yeah. All of them. So I think that's the way to go. If that's a success metric, the people who run companies today have been in those jobs for many years. And if you look at out of the advertising agency business, the people who today running companies are people who always gave 15 or 20 years to a company through the foundation, through their formative years. And it's only when they achieved greatness or the skills they required did they decide to take 1 or 2 changes. But it was never about 20 changes. So advice to anybody is get your skills right, understand what you want to do, follow that or follow your dreams, follow your passion and stay with that. But changing a job for a job change's sake is not something I would prescribe.
Sure. A lot has changed in the advertising industry also, Colvyn. A lot of stuff has moved digital. There are many, many small firms that have come up. There is, aggressive pricing on all categories. For a young professional in the business or a youngster wanting to get into advertising, what are the 3-4 trends that he should be cognizant of, he or she should be cognizant of?
So the first, it's not a trend, it's the way it's going to be the air we breathe, is this digital ecosystem. So today's consumer or the entire customer engagement cycle is not of what was traditionally known as media forms, a newspaper or television, because that's not going to be there in the future as well. So I would really suggest you spend your time trying to understand this technology platform. Now, in marketing or in advertising, it's all about targeting a specific individual or customer to try and get him or her to buy what you're selling. You're not in advertising just for art's sake. You're in advertising to do a role. The role is to grow somebody's sales or to build a brand or to grow categories so that future growth is protected. And that's the value of building a brand. It's going to be built today on a digital platform. The other element is what I call the zero moment of truth. Irrespective of what brand and the value a brand had, when you get onto that laptop space or your mobile, your entire thinking has changed because suddenly you're in a comparative zone. Your zero moment of truth is where the brand you thought you were looking for fades because something else had something better to offer you. It engaged you a little differently. It seemed to have the personality which appealed to you, and you end up buying something many times on price. That's the Amazon Snapdeal world, but it's not always price. At that moment or the zero moment of truth, you can go somewhere else. So I would advise everybody firstly understand this space completely. It's the space. Spend your time. If you have to learn code, learn from the ground floor. Do what you want, and if you stay in that space, the rest will follow because great creativity and ideas. That's something, of course, it's still the most important thing, irrespective of what space you are on. But that will be there too. But don't shy away from this technology world. Now, the way we looked at it in JWT or in advertising is that finally, this generation or this new generation is going to be a native in this digital space. Sure. So if you're not a native already, I suggest you learn how to become a native and learn that language. That's going to be the only differentiator in the future. So you've got to forget a lot of the past. You know how this works. Change is going to be the biggest thing. And every day this change will be upon us. Now you've got to either embrace it or run away from it. I would advise all youngsters and all people who are in any business, embrace technology, embrace the digital world, understand what's happening, understand that ecosystem and see how you can get into it.
The other, general belief around advertising is that there are two arms to the agency, the left brain and the right brain, and the twines don't meet. I mean, for a youngster, can you really afford to be one-sided and not the other-sided? Is that a complete myth?
So the days of really being, mothers are defined as being multitasked. I think in the agency business, you have to multitask. Firstly, you've got to understand what an idea is. Whether you're in the management side or you're in what we call in strategic planning or if you're in creativity. So if you don't understand an idea, you're not going to be a part of or a welcome part of a team which presents an idea or a proposition around a brand to a client. So understanding the idea, understanding how to take that idea and amplify it and give it the best leg so that that idea can travel is important. But two is to also understand that how you can take that idea and amplify it. I think that's where the digital world comes in. So it's idea creation, and whilst there are people who are in creative, it's not that you don't understand it or it is alien to you, because your judgment of advertising is no different from the consumer's judgment of advertising. So chances are if you don't like something, you're probably right because the consumer is not going to like it either. So never give up your discerning eye. For years I've said if you don't have a discerning eye, when you see a piece of work or an idea and you don't articulate an objection or an approval of that idea, you're not really a part of the team. So yes, you need that bit. You also need to understand marketing. You need to understand what that idea is meant to do as a proposition around that brand. So you've got to understand that bit. And you've got to understand that brands are not short-term. Brands are longer-term than careers are. So there is somebody who is buying this idea to create a brand idea which will have legs and which will travel, which will transcend markets and be the best, let's say, ingredient in that brand's life cycle. So these are many things. So you've got to really understand much, much more than just I like an ad or I like my client or I think this strategy is great. Not enough.
When you see youngsters coming in, you've seen generations of youngsters come in, what do you think about the talent gap? Is there a talent gap over there? Are they coming in with the right skill sets, or the right ideas or the right knowledge? Where do they need most help, actually?
So this is a very interesting question because firstly, everybody is commodity when they come into a company. You're as good as the next guy because beyond a point, whether you topped your class or you didn't top your class, beyond a point, you're going to do a job henceforth. So on the day when you come in, you're cookie cutter as anybody else. It's a question of what can you do different? How well can you do it? So the skills, and there is a gap because we see it quickly. There are firstly gaps in attitude. So if people believe that they were born into or entitled to what they were going to achieve in a company, those days are gone. You've got to be able to or want to prove yourself. So I think that's an attitude element. Two is whatever you've learnt or you've been taught, that's great. Just use that as a springboard. What you're going to do for a client is very different. It's got to be real time, contextual to a market, and therefore you'll understand those differences. It's great to have the knowledge, but it's greater, I think, to have the experience to understand what works and what doesn't. The difference is what somebody can do. And I think what you can do is skill yourself better while you're in the job. Because earlier when you were in university, somebody was funding you and it didn't matter what you achieved. Here, somebody is paying for you and therefore they want a return. And that return on their investment is what makes you successful or a failure. So just remember that the money you get from a company is there as long as you are able to deliver to the expectations of that company. So my advice to everybody is there is a gap. Nobody knows everything. Today, thankfully, you've got Google, so you can halfway get there. But if you don't have a discerning eye, you won't be able to choose right from wrong. So it's about experience, it's about hard work, it's about the depth and width of understanding the category which you're working on. Nothing superficial works in any category today. So you've got to give it the time, you've got to learn a lot more, you've got to read a lot more, you've got to understand the category a lot more, you need to understand your engagement with the customer a lot more. So it's finally company is about take, and it's about you giving. And with that, you'll probably arrive at a successful career going forward.
The other piece is that you also have a huge number of people competing for the top job. So what is the one factor or the 2-3 things that youngsters who are ambitious, like you were, need to do to really get to the top? And how, focused and how strategic should their own planning of their career be?
Just for a minute to move away from advertising in this world of business, take Sachin Tendulkar. He was 16 when we first cast him in the Boost ad. Boost is the secret of my energy. Do you think he had vision of greatness then? Or was he still, so young and he would not have known that he would go on to be that? I don't think he knew that. I don't think he knew that he had the talent or the tenacity or the perseverance to do what he achieved. But in his career life, I think he mapped what he wanted to do and he never gave up. It's no different in a job. When you join on that day or on that morning, you're no different. There's 35 to 40 years ahead of you. You've got to think of all the milestones which will get you there. Now, if you know where you want to be, and I must say that nobody knows where they want to be. And definitely nobody knows where they're going to end up. But there's no harm in saying, I want to be the top of the company I'm working with. So that's a good starting point. I just say it as simply as this. I want to lead this company. You may subsequently change, but at that point of time, just say, I want to lead this company. And what do you think I need to do? Now, in that, you'll realize that there are a lot of things which you need to do every morning when you come into office, which will just make you shine a little more than the person next to you. And is there a long lineup of people who want that same ambition? There is. Everybody wants to get rich quick. Everybody wants to be the top boss. It makes sense. I mean, why would you not want to be the leader of a company if you were given the choice? But it comes after you have to work for it. Sure. It's nobody's, unless you're working for your father's company, unless you have the good fortune of being an industrialist son where whatever happens, the industrialist son is going to get that role. But if you're not, there are enough companies where you can be the boss. All you've got to do is take the right steps in your own future.
So let's look at continuous education then. A lot of, the problem in India is that A, our education system doesn't equip you for the real world, and B, that everybody does the education alongside and thinks that the moment they've done their postgraduate or MBA that they don't need to learn, and then the work teaches them. How important is continuous learning, and how great can the digital medium be? This is more from an UpGrad kind of a standpoint. What do you think can be the possibilities there?
So, and I'm sharing really life's learnings. You must read a lot. So, no course or no curriculum can teach you as much as you can by just reading. And if you're in a particular field or space, just read up all there is. And today you've got Google. So, it's a simple set an alert for the category you wish to lead or the category with which you want to be an expert on. And keep yourself abreast. Two is, if you look at online education, or if you look at continuous education post your formal education, it can only help, because all it will do is it will keep you abreast of what's happening, but it will deliver it to you in a different way. It will deliver it to you in what's current at that point of time. Now, if you look at, again, education or learning or continuous knowledge, every 5 or 10 years something's changing. So there's no harm in keeping, or I would say, in fact, there's an advantage in understanding what's changing and being abreast with somebody who's just passing out, because that's the only way you can be as good as, if not better. So at that point of time, when you're competing with somebody who's 10 or 15 years younger than you, who's the current crop of this new generation of what has changed, it can help you because you know that and you have this as well. So it's really an and situation. Continue to learn, continue to understand what they're learning, or what is being taught to people who are 5 or 10 years younger than you. And if you've got what you have now, which is the wisdom of 5 or 10 years at this point of time, you're just so much better equipped. There is no substitute to hard work in even learning, and there's no substitute to hard work in what you do in your role.
So learning is continuous. You're saying that to be on top, you have to constantly expand your mind and really soak in everything that there is to know about the space.
I think the huge advantage of this generation is that everything is available. And it's available at home, on your laptop, on your phone, wherever. On the go. You want to do it on a train, wherever, it's available. Today, even on an aircraft, the first 50 whatever they give free, and then you pay $1 for 500 megabytes of data. So learning is continuous. Two is, if you continue to want to learn, learning is not something that somebody can give you in a spoon or prescribe, please go and learn. It's what you want to do. It's about your innate belief that if I continue to know more than somebody else, I'll definitely do a little better than somebody else. So I think that is intrinsic, or that has to be the core of your being. Try and always be more knowledgeable than somebody else. The day you're that, you'll be noticed, you'll be spotted. So in a herd of 5,000 people, and today companies are known to have 10,000 or 20,000 people in an organization. What makes you different? Why should somebody pick you up? Because you're not entitled to being picked up. There are other people as good as you, right? And other people are still pursuing their dreams, their hopes, their aspirations, their ambition. You've got to do the same, and you've got to hope like hell. So there's an element of luck. Never give up. Be motivated, self-driven. Forget, passion is everything in anything you do. Whatever you do, if you don't have the passion, or you end up being lackluster and dead on the job, it doesn't make sense. So I tell everybody, please, whether you have whatever it be, if it's birdseed which gets your energy levels up, get your energy levels up and try and do better. Because if you don't want to do better, no parents are going to come and beyond a point they can't push you. Finally, it's your life.
Last question, a message for UpGrad and the kind of work that they're doing in the continuous education space.
Well, I think UpGrad, by sheer definition of UpGrad, I like the name. So I'm sure its intent is to take, an existing, set of, and I'll say this, talented people, because people have talent, and trying to add skills or dimensions to this set of people, who are interested. So interested people who want to, upscale their own talents and try and cope better in a very competitive world. Is what UpGrad can give you. So I would say go for it. At the least, you'll know more than you knew before, and at the best you'll be probably picked up faster because you would have added dimensions or skills which you may not necessarily have got being on the job. Just a point, when you're in a job, you will never ever have enough time to do this and that. So while you can, please do it.
Last question, and I want to ask you this. You've interacted with a lot of global head honchos from advertising firms, etc. How do Indians stack up in the world stage, and do you see Indians taking more and more roles? Because you've done that on the international stage with JWT. What's taking Indians on a global stage, you think?
I think we're fortunate in India. We're always competing, and it gives us a skill to want to do better than somebody else. And our parents push us more. Our education system pushes us more. Our best friends will push you more because if others, they're going to do better. So there's that little competitive spirit in all of us. But when I look at it from a global standpoint, actually one or two people do not, I don't think we have enough Indians in the global world. I don't think Indian companies are global enough. I think Indian companies don't have the ambition or the stomach to want to go as global as they should want to be. Now, if you take China or you take Japan, Japan would have 3,000 global brands. In every category, they have so many global brands which are truly global. Take the Koreans, take Samsung, take LG. In every category they lead. Now you count in India, how many truly global brands do you have? Yes, Indian companies have had the gumption or the ambition to be able to go out and buy companies. So I think the Tatas have done a fabulous job by buying Jaguar Land Rover. But that's not enough. I think Indian companies must have the appetite for more growth, must have the appetite for taking their own brands global in a larger sense. Otherwise, we're very happy. India is a large market. We are 1/6 or 1/7 of the world. As long as your brand is doing well, why should I, waste my time trying to go into countries where there's no growth? If you go to Europe, you wonder, where will the growth come? But I disagree with that. Finally, there's a future world, and all things do change. And are we as good as anybody anywhere else in the world? I think we are. Do we have the talent? Definitely we have the talent. It's a question, do we have enough opportunities? Now, if you join a global company, your greatest opportunity is you're already halfway there because those companies are anyway global. But to make a mark there, you have to be extremely talented or very special. And I think of, say, Diageo or now Microsoft, and various companies like that, or Facebook, which was last week, where Indians have really made their mark. They must have been extremely special. And can everybody be like that? Very difficult, but I would think people today in India, given the fact that it's a very level playing field, you must have that ambition. Don't give up on ambition. So if I have to say, what is that one ingredient which you must have? You must be greedy for yourself, and that greed must definitely have ambition at the root of what you want to do. So if you can articulate that I want to be the big boy in any global company, try and pursue that dream. Don't give it up, because if you give up, you've already into your nightmare phase, which you don't want. So at this point, while you can dream, stay with the dream, hope like mad, and just work hard, of course. You must. No shortcuts in life, right? No shortcut, and leave no stone unturned to get what you want to do.
Great, Colvyn. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.